Hi, welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton from theketonis.com, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we have a doctor in the house, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check with a trusted medical professional about your personal medical concerns. Hey, Dr. Barry, it's nice to see you.
Hey, Kim, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm experiencing a Sunday, which usually means laundry and chores.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought this was a good opportunity to chat because a couple of days ago, you wrote a tweet that got a little bit of attention because I know you're never at all, inflammatory on Twitter.
Yeah, I tend to save all my snark and salt and inflammation for Twitter. I try to be much more loving and cajoling on other social media.
Right. They're nicer on Facebook.
Yep.
Yeah. So your tweet, I believe, said, don't take nutritional advice from fat doctors. Is that what it said?
Yeah, that give or take, that's roughly what it said. Yeah.
Okay. Why did you tweet this?
So really, in all honesty, the biggest reason I tweeted that is that becoming aware that there is a proper human diet and that obesity is not some genetic predestination, and that type 2 diabetes is not something you're stuck with for life. It was really a tweet of part of my kind of self-realization journey, because just so people know, I'm not a forever skinny guy who is making fun of fat people or fat doctors. That is the farthest thing from the reality. The reality of this is that I used to be almost 300 pounds and was pre-diabetic, very inflamed, and miserable. I was the fat doctor I was talking about in the tweet. And back when I was that fat, miserable, inflamed doctor, I knew nothing about human nutrition. I gave no good advice to my patients. If someone came to me back then and said, hey, doc, I'm 50 pounds overweight. I want to get some fat off. I want to get healthier. I want to reverse my type 2 diabetes. Every single bit of advice I gave them would have been wrong. And so that's the first part of it. And that's the first thing that everybody should know about me is I used to be a fat doctor. So this is not me throwing stones. This is me basically looking back at my own journey as a doctor and as a healthcare provider and saying, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about back when I was fat, because if I had, I would have fixed it. And then when I did find out, I did fix it. Secondly, everybody who listening to this should know that I have dedicated the entirety of the remainder of my career to reversing the obesity epidemic. That is the calling that I answer to every day. When Nisha or my kids are wanting to go out and play or piddle or go to the mall or go wherever, and I'm in here on the computer doing research, and all day today I've been reading about ancient Egyptian diets, coprolites, the different levels of mummification that Egyptian people who died would go through depending on their financial status and their class hierarchy. And that's very important to understand that stuff. But if you'd asked me back in 2006, hey, fat doctor, how should I lose weight? I would have said, well, you need to eat lots of whole grains and don't eat any saturated fat and jog. You just need to burn more than you eat. It's very simple. Join Weight Watchers and join the gym. And I would have given that patient a lot of busy work, wouldn't I? They'd have been very busy calculating the calories and how many sets and how many reps. And then they would have looked up 6 months later and would maybe have gained 5 pounds, 2 pounds of which would have been muscle. And then they would have given up. And then they would have gained that 5 pounds back plus 5 pounds more. And they then would have considered themselves a failure. They would have said things like, I'm a failure. I'm a glutton. I'm a sloth. I deserve this. None of those things are true. But they would have felt all those things, and their life would have been impacted by all those things because I was a fat, ignorant doctor. And so that's what drives me every day, is that there is an obesity epidemic and that there is a type 2 diabetes epidemic. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is trying to bend those curves that seem to only want to keep going up. My whole mission is to stop the epidemic of obesity in the U.S. and indeed in the entire world. And so obviously the people who, as of this point, I think that tweet's gotten like 2,500 likes and 300 or 400 retweets. So I think a lot of people on Twitter got what I was saying. And they're like, yeah, that's right. You shouldn't. Just like you shouldn't take advice from about your car motor from a mechanic whose car won't start. If your hairdresser's hair is ratchet, you probably shouldn't take hairdressing advice from her or him. I mean, it's a very common sense statement, but I think when I threw it out there in the universe on Twitter, where there are, a lot of people who do like me and a few people who don't, the few people who don't like me saw that as an opportunity to paint me as this evil, mean bully. And it's just, that's not what the tweet was about at all.
Right. And I do like you. We are friends. We are family.
Very good friends.
And I am actually somebody that potentially had a bit of a reaction to it, as do some other very well-meaning people who care about you as well. And so I don't think anybody who knows you thinks that you were thinking the thing that your critics are saying that you were saying. I think that Twitter has a limited number of characters, and short statements lack subtlety.
Yeah.
And I think the subtlety of this can get a little dicier, because I don't think you're saying the opposite of your statement, right? If you say, don't rely on a fat doctor for your nutritional advice, you're not saying just because somebody's thin, they know what they're doing.
Of course not. Yeah, there are thousands of very thin healthcare providers out there who give the same idiotic nutrition advice as I gave for the first few years of my medical practice. Being slender has nothing to do with it. Being slender is not evidence that you know about the proper human diet and that you know about the proper feeding of the human animal. That doesn't mean that at all. You could be, genetically blessed. You could have any number of physiological reasons, either physiology or pathophysiology, why you're slender. So no, obviously the opposite of that argument, I would not imply that were true at all. Totally agree.
Right. And I think that maybe, I think, I'll speak from my perspective. I am a person who went keto, changed to the proper human diet, lost a lot of excess body fat, but by many segments of the population, the label fat could still be applied to me, right? I weigh more.
I hear you. Yeah, maybe, barely.
More than someone might want to optimally in our aesthetic sensibility that we have in our world today.
Yeah, and maybe I should have said, don't take nutrition advice from fat doctors with elevated A1Cs. Maybe I should have said that.
Well, okay. There you go. So because we both know that from a blood marker and metabolic standpoint, I am a healthy person.
Absolutely. Yes.
And, also, so this gets really messy, just like all sorts of things using the word fat seem to these days, because there's so many negative connotations with the word fat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if anybody felt that I was shaming them for their body size, then I apologize, because that's absolutely 0% of the intention or the motivation behind that tweet. But with that being said, if I triggered you and if I caused an emotional response and if I caused you to think about this tweet and if I caused you to respond to this tweet, even if it was in a hateful, angry fashion, I'm okay with that. Because what we've been doing for the last 50 years, which is kind of, doctors going along to get along, trying to keep their head down and not be the guy, that a red flag is attached to, that obviously hasn't been working at all, because the obesity, increase is basically a logarithmic curve at this point. I mean, it's just continuing to accelerate. So what we've been doing in the past isn't working. And so if I have to ruffle a feather or two in order to make people think, I'm okay with that. I'll take the brunt of that because I feel like, sometimes that needs to happen. Now, if people follow me on Instagram or Facebook or watch my YouTube videos, you know of me or know me or you've read my book, you know that I'm 100% behind anyone who has a problem with their A1C or their if they have fatty liver or if they have any chronic medical condition. I'm your guy. I am the coach in the corner, wiping the blood and giving you a drink of water and saying, okay, you got this. Let's get back out there and let's try it this way this time and see if it doesn't work better. I'm that guy. But on Twitter, in order to really, get traction and have your tweets reach a broader audience, sometimes you have to be a little bit inflammatory. And I actually honestly didn't intend for that tweet to be inflammatory to anyone except for healthcare providers who weren't actually thinking and studying about human nutrition, who were just, going in and basically repeating the party line. The American Obesity Association, the American Diabetes Association say, do this, that's what you should do. I'm not going to think about this. I'm just going to repeat that like a trained parrot. I definitely wanted to trigger those guys. If there are overweight or obese healthcare providers out there, I want you to think about, the advice that you live every day and also the advice that you give to your hundreds, if not thousands of people who basically blindly trust you to give them the best nutrition advice available.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you get to the heart of it, as a person, I spent decades as a very heavy person, now a less heavy person, but a very heavy person living in the world, seeing doctors. And I think one of the underlying things that maybe your tweet struck the nerve of for people, maybe not your intended audience, for patients rather than doctors, is we're very used to being dismissed for our body size. Because we're big, we're stupid. If we were smarter, we'd do better because we could know better, but we're dumb. That's why we're fat.
Yeah, you're lazy, you're a glutton, you're a sloth, you're a loser, you're a failure. I used to feel those exact same things every morning when I would get up, to go be getting ready to go into the office and see patients, when I had to suck in my gut to try to get my pants button to button and then hope that the fabric would stretch a little before the button just popped.
Right. And then you yell at somebody for putting your pants in the dryer.
Right. Who dried these pants on hot? Right. Exactly. That used to be my life. So I'm intimately familiar with that feeling of I'm a failure. Because you got to remember, I was a doctor. I was the guy who was going to tell you this is what you need to do. And I couldn't even do it for myself. And so I could see that it would strike a nerve. And because there is a lot of, how should we say it, younger, metabolically very healthy experts in the weight loss space who have never been overweight and who basically yell at overweight people and say, you're a loser, you're lazy, you eat too much, you need to suck it up and step it up. And all that advice is terrible advice, because if somebody's ever been overweight, they know they do try. They do try very much. They've calculated and recorded their calorie intake. They've calculated and recorded their reps and their sets and how many days this week and how many everything. Right. None of that stuff works. And so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately the vast majority of people know that you're in the corner of the person trying to get metabolically healthy. I think my personal preference, and I struggle with this, I don't want to be like, oh, this is terrible. I have had interactions with people who are healthy at any size people, which I think is a great movement in certain areas, but I do think there are some limitations to the size at which one is healthy. I'm now going to also get hate mail for saying that, but I think there is, but there's also a range of sizes at which we could be healthy.
Yes, definitely. Within a range, I totally agree. There are some people who are emaciatingly thin, who are very healthy. And there are some people who are how should we say it so it's not offensive? Very fluffy,
Yes.
plump, big boned in the South, we say, right?
Right,
And
which is kind of BS, but yeah.
right. You can be exquisitely metabolically healthy and be overweight if we just use a BMI.
Over
right?
the ideal measurement.
Right. You can be exquisitely metabolically healthy within reason. If your BMI is 27, 28, maybe even 29, you can still have perfectly normal markers. And I think that those people would be at very, very low risk of heart attack and stroke if all their metabolic markers are in good range, even though they are big boned or heavy set or healthy. We say in the South also, she's healthy. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And I think this is where that word fat gets really messy, where you used it in a certain context in your mind to mean a certain thing.
Yes.
Whereas to a trainer at my 24-hour fitness who wears a size 2 and has never even contemplated gaining weight in their life, fat means something different.
Exactly right. Totally. And coming out of many people's mouths, fat is a judgment.
Right.
Right. And coming from me as a doctor and a healthcare provider, it's not a moral or ethical judgment. It's a statement of objective fact. That's how I meant that. But I think that many people on Twitter, and I don't think there are many honest people on Twitter who took it that I was making a moral or ethical judgment. I think there was maybe 20 assholes on Twitter who took it that way and blew it up and painted a picture that then other honest, well-meaning people were like, "Oh my goodness, wow! I can't believe he meant that," right? Which I didn't, and I didn't say that. I didn't say that fat people are more morally reprehensible or obese people are lazy gluttons. That's not what I said. I said don't take nutrition advice from a fat doctor because either that doctor does not know how to properly feed a human animal, or that doctor, for some personal reason, isn't applying what he or she knows to their own life. They're not practicing good self-care if they do know what to do. And so that in and of itself is worrisome in another way.
Right. I mean, doctors are actually one of the highest populations of substance abuse, which I would include food potentially as one of those substances.
Absolutely. One of the higher rates of suicide, very high rates of heart attack and stroke in the healthcare community. And I don't know, I haven't looked this up, but I bet doctors have a higher percentage of smoking than the average population these days. Definitely healthcare providers, paramedical, nurses,
a lot of
paramedics
nurses out there I see smoking on their breaks.
Yeah. And so, if you put yourself out there as a healthcare professional, then a lot of people are going to see you as you must know, because in my opinion, the foundation of all healthcare is nutrition. If you're not eating a proper diet, then I can't make you healthy. With every pill and injection I've got, I can't make you healthy if you're eating a crap diet. And so with that understanding that nutrition is the very bedrock of all health, then how are you going to be a doctor who's morbidly obese and smokes and doesn't do anything for your health? How are you then going to be a reputable source of nutrition education for a patient who is wanting to reverse their obesity or type 2 diabetes?
Sorry, it's Blue Angel Day in San Francisco. If you're hearing the sound of an incoming invasion, it's not, don't panic. I don't know if my microphone's picking it up, but there's whooshing noises overhead.
Everybody thought it was somebody coming to drop the bomb on me, I think.
Right. I mean, that's only the next step. So I totally get where you're coming from. Knowing you, I didn't actually see it as an inflammatory statement, but if it had come from somebody I didn't know, I would have.
Yeah, I understand that.
The problem with social media is
I totally understand that.
You.
Yeah, the tweet got a lot of initial interaction, and so Twitter threw it out there to thousands of other people because it looked like it was going to be a popular, highly interactive tweet. And so I think it landed on the desktop or the phone of a lot of people who don't know me. And so that was kind of their first introduction to me. And if they happen to be a little overweight or obese, then they heard that that judgment word fat
Right.
instead of that objective description word, and they immediately got emotional. And you're, as well as I do, anytime you're emotional, your logical thinking and your judgment is clouded, and so then they didn't take the time to go look at my profile and watch the video at the top of my Twitter saying, I am on a mission to help everyone with obesity. And so they just made a quick judgment call, and then they tweeted an angry response, and then we were off to the races.
Yeah. So I guess, my main point when I saw that was I think the best doctor to take nutritional advice from is somebody that used to be obese and is no longer obese, right? They used to be a doctor, now they're not. They fixed it, so now what can they know about the process?
Yeah, and maybe I should retweet it and say, say that. That might be a less inflammatory tweet. An ex-fat doctor.
Right, because I've been to a lot of thin doctors who give shit advice.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And I think a doctor who has been overweight or obese and then has corrected it in a sustainable way, so they're not basically starving themselves for the rest of their life, that's the guy or the gal you want to take nutrition advice from.
Right. And I think if I look at some of the physicians and medical professionals that are in this field, the low carb arena or similar, they can be some of the best advocates, because there's a way as a non-medical trained patient, you go into a doctor, they tell you something, you're like, that can't be right. It's not working. And yet, like, you have no recourse. Like, you are like, what do I do with this? Whereas when a doctor, and I've heard this story from you and Dr. Tro and Sarah Gottfried and, a bunch of doctors, that they went to their doctor and were like, I can't lose weight. What's going on? What advice do you have? And they were told to, exercise more and eat less. They were peers with this person who was giving them this advice and could say, well, that's just utter bullshit. Like peer to peer, that's bad advice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was that, doctors and nurses make the worst patients of all. And so when I was obese, I never went to another doctor. I just thought, dude, this is you're going to have to fix this. You caused it. You're going to have to fix it, figure out how you did it and reverse it. And so I never went to another doctor, but I'm sure that if I went to any doctor in my area, they would have said, you're just going to have to cut down the calories, maybe join the gym, try to eat, lots of whole grains and fruits and vegetables, and stay away from the bacon and the ribeye. And at that point, I would have said something along the lines of, depending at where I hit in my journey. Initially, I would have said, yeah, I know, I've been thinking I need to probably suck it up and do that, but I just hadn't done it yet. Or a year later, I could say, no, dumbass, I've been doing that and I am still gaining weight. So no, that doesn't work. You've heard me say before, but maybe some listening haven't. Doctors all secretly think that their patients are being non-compliant, right? We think that we give this wonderful advice. And so I'm like, eat whole grains and cut out the saturated fat and jog. And then you come back in 6 months and you've gained 3 more pounds. I secretly, even though you say I was doing that, it didn't work. I secretly think you've been laying on the couch eating Cheetos and Pop-Tarts that whole 6 months. Right. I think you've been non-compliant, but I could not say that about myself. And that was the epiphany for me, is I live with me. I knew that I wasn't doing those things. I had tightened it up. I was not a glutton and I was not a sloth. I was jogging 3 or 4 days a week. I was eating only stone ground, whole wheat, whatever, lots of veg, lots of fruits. And any piece of meat I put in my mouth was like skinless chicken breast.
Right.
Or even if I ate a chicken leg, I would take the skin off. If I ate, a piece of beef, I would cut all the fat off so it was just the lean meat. And that just wasn't working.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why doctors can be so helpful on this journey to validate, no, this works and that doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And so if I triggered a few healthcare providers out there and upset them, I'm happy about that. I'm glad, because healthcare providers always need to have their cage shaken a little bit. They need to look around and go, wait a minute, is what I'm saying, is that really the state of the art? and let me say this, sometimes the state of the art is not the most modern advice. Sometimes the state of the art is the most ancient of advice, right? And so just state of the art doesn't mean it just came out in 2019. That doesn't always mean that. Sometimes, and so when it comes to technology, obviously the iPhone 11 is much better than the iPhone 7. Yes, definitely, no doubt about that. But is the American diabetes diet better than the diet we ate 50,000 years ago? And my answer would be to that, absolutely not. The diet we ate 50,000 years ago is the proper human diet and is the state of the art when it comes to human nutrition. And so next year when the ADA comes out with their 2020 guidelines, unless they go keto carnivore, it still won't be state of the art. Now, I predict it'll move closer. They're going to keep talking more and more about low carb because low carb is now in the guidelines.
Right.
And each year, I think that paragraph is going to get bigger and bigger each year until it engulfs the American Diabetes Association guidelines. That might take 10 or 15 years. And what I would like to prevent in those 10 or 15 years is us losing thousands of loved ones who died prematurely because of their obesity-induced cancer or their obesity-induced, whatever, or their obesity-induced type 2 diabetes that led to a heart attack or a stroke. We don't have to lose all those thousands of loved ones. We can keep them if we help them understand that just because a guy's got a white coat on and a stethoscope draped around his shoulders, he may not know exactly what he or she is talking about.
Right. Yeah, I think we're in this place where how do you know what you can trust? Right. And a visual inspection is kind of helpful. Just your doctors seem to be walking the walk that they're talking,
Yes.
is helpful. And I do agree that doctors and really anybody giving advice is at a higher standard of looking like they take their advice.
Exactly. You should look like you take your own advice. And the hairdresser should have beautiful hair, and the mechanic's car should start on the first turn of the key if we're going to trust their advice. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, I will say that what visually looks like optimal health for one person isn't always what you think it looks like for you.
100% agree.
Yeah. Not to be too self-serving. But, it brings me to another topic. Not to be too self-serving. Under what circumstances would you point to a still fat to some degree doctor and say, well, they're not following, where do you draw the line this is a very poorly formed question. But I guess the point is, you walk into a doctor's office, you see a doctor, and you objectively think, I would like to be thinner than that doctor. Should you not follow their advice? Should you dismiss them out of hand?
Well, I don't know if you should dismiss them out of hand. It depends on where that doctor is in their health improvement journey, right? And so if you had come to see me at the Berry Clinic, 6 months after I had read Atkins' Diet Revolution and the Primal Blueprint and the Paleo Diet, I was still overweight. I think by that point I had reversed my morbid obesity, but I was still obese by the BMI standards. And so I would not have been offended at that point if a patient had said, well, doc, you're a little on the fluffy side yourself. How do you know this works? And then I would have said, well, I used to weigh, 30, 40 pounds more than I do now. I'm getting better every day. And so I think this advice will work for you as well. But if I would say that if a doctor has kind of, when you ask about nutrition, if their eyes glaze over, if they hand you an ADA handout or an AHA handout and they're like, I don't know, join the gym, and join Weight Watchers, if you get that kind of advice, then I think that should be an immediate red flag that they haven't really thought this through. They're just following the party line, so to speak.
Right.
And they're probably not, first of all, they're not giving you any advice that's tailored to you individually, which I think is very important. And secondly, They obviously haven't, if they believe in the ADA and the AHA, and if it truly works, then they haven't been doing it themselves, have they? Or they would not be obese.
Right. And I think that's, again, some of the subtlety that Twitter cannot deliver is that you don't a doctor should not be like a drive-through window. Like, you're in relationship with your doctor, you're in conversation with your doctor, and if they're giving you advice, they should be able to back that advice up with either personal experience or clinical experience. And even if you went to a thin doctor and they gave you advice, you might say, well, can you talk to me about how this advice has helped other people in your actual experience lose weight?
Yeah, exactly. And so if you went to a very slender doctor and they gave you the American Diabetes Association diet handout and said, here, do this, join the gym, join Weight Watchers, and you said as a patient, well, doctor, how many other patients have you had have success with this, long-term, sustainable success? And the doctor said something like, well, losing weight's hard. Most people can't stick with it. Did you hear that judgment right there? Did you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Losing weight is hard, and most people don't have what it takes. That's what that doctor just said.
Right.
Immediately making that a moral and an ethical thing. But again, most people are just bad people. They don't have what it takes to suck it up and step it up. And that's what they're effectively saying when they say sentences like that. And if you kept questioning them, if you were able to keep questioning them without them getting emotionally upset, which would happen very quickly, but if you were able to just say, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but let me ask you this question, and you kept going down that road with them, they would eventually have to admit that they believe people who are overweight are gluttons and sloths. They're lazy and they eat too much, and that's what made them fat. And that's just not the case.
Right. So, turning slightly to the, judgments I think people feel around some of these words, is that I think it's a really good opening talking point. I think some of the tweets I'm going to ignore the people that are just assholes, but like some of the tweets from people that I respect were like, well, we're not all the same metabolically. Sometimes it's not the same answer. Sometimes there's more going on in simple nutrition. It's a complex topic. What would you say to those arguments?
Well, the tweet is actually either a quote or a paraphrase from a sentence in my book, as my doctor told me. And then that entire book was written to basically begin a conversation. And so now that I think about it, every tweet is kind of an opening shot to open a conversation. That's what they all are, is because I want people to think about the party line that's been indoctrinated into their head through 4 years of med school, however many years of residency, and then their practice. You got to think. You got to think on your feet. You've got to think newly and freshly all the time. You can't just say, well, what I was taught 20 years ago in med school, that's state of the art. That's what I'm going to regurgitate parrot-like to my patients, and that's it. And so that tweet was meant to open a conversation. A few people took that conversation to a very dark and hateful and mean place, which if you read any of my other tweets, you realize it's not what I'm about, right? I'm about helping people who have trouble with their weight.
Yeah. And I think what was triggered potentially in some people is what I said a little earlier, but it's sort of an important point to me. So I will say it again, is that sentence is indistinguishable when taken in isolation from the kind of things that a lot of fat people have heard all of their life.
Yep.
From people who've never struggled with their weight.
I totally agree. And if someone read that one tweet and stopped right there and got emotional and got pissed off and just, blocked me on Twitter and went back to doing what they've been doing for the last however many years that hasn't been working, then there you go. I guess they've made their choice. But if, as I had hoped, that tweet did trigger you a little bit emotionally and made you say something like, who the hell is this guy anyway? Let me go back and look at some more of his tweets. Oh, he's got a YouTube channel. Let me go watch one of his YouTube channels. Is he an asshole? Is he saying fat people suck? Is that who this guy is? And then after you've done a little bit of that kind of research, you go, oh no, wait a minute. He used to be fat and he's trying to help me. That's what he's doing here. And so I think a little bit of that kind of research, and they will be like, oh, okay, so there's actually another way besides join the gym and join Weight Watchers. There's actually a more subtle, more physiologically correct way to lose fat. Maybe I should give that a try. That was actually, my unspoken goal with the tweet. Definitely was to trigger some engagement, but to help people realize that maybe the lies they've been told for a long time are not helping them any. And if I had just repeated that same lie, how would I be helping?
Right, absolutely. And I think anyone who went very deep with you would see that there was 0 degrees of shame intended in anything you said.
Right. Shame never helps. Using shame is not a tool I ever use as a doctor. It's not a tool I use as a spouse or a father. Shame is not a tool that should be used with other human beings whom you value or care about, because it never leads to a good place. I don't think. I think there's always a better strategy than to shame someone, and it's just not something I do.
Right. So let's turn this into a positive thing in a way. Like, not that it was negative, but anyway. Let's say there are doctors out there who know the right thing. They've been following you. I mean, not that you're the only one, but like, they believe the things that you believe. They believe that an ancestrally appropriate diet is appropriate, which is sort of redundant anyway, but they believe that this is the way to go. They're eating low carb. They have a busy medical practice, and they're still a fat doctor.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Well, there may be some other things going on in their life that they really need to take a hard look at. I think that any doctor who is obese or morbidly obese, who institutes a low-carb, keto, carnivore diet, is going to lose some amount of fat. I just think that that's going to happen naturally. If you were eating the standard American diet or the AHA or the ADA diet and you go keto, you're going to lose some fat. That's just how it is. Now, are you going to go immediately right back down to your ideal body weight? Some people do. Most people don't. For most people, and that's why we call it a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. This is not a sitcom or a made-for-TV movie. This takes
snap.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That doesn't happen. Yeah. But here in the real world, that doesn't happen. It takes months for most people, and it takes years for some people. And so, if someone were at that doctor's office and said, but you're a little overweight, how come, if this works, how come you're not doing it? If that doctor were low carb, keto, carnivore, that doctor would happily immediately say, well, just let me tell you, I used to weigh, 297 pounds. Now I only weigh 275. I'm doing it, but I'm just not where I want to be yet. Right. And so no overweight doctor who is doing a proper human diet would be triggered by the patient saying, but doctor, you're obese. Why should I listen to your advice?
Right.
That doctor would be happy to just explain to you why you should listen to their advice, because they would tell you where they've been and where they are now, and then where they plan on going. And then you would actually get to join that journey with that doctor as a partner and go on that journey together, which I think is one of the most beautiful things that two humans can do. But that doctor would never be triggered by this. And I think there were many, many comments of people who said, yeah, 100%. I used to be, an overweight doctor or an overweight nurse or an overweight paramedic or an overweight whatever. And now that I'm keto, I can actually help other people reverse their obesity just like I reverse mine, or just like I'm in the process of doing myself.
Right.
Because for some people, it takes years. And I think there are a few key physiological things that can really slow down someone's fat loss. And you and I have talked about that on other lives and other podcasts before in detail. But I'm happy to go into them again if you'd like, or people can listen to the other stuff, the other podcasts.
Maybe we could touch briefly on a few of them before the plane comes through my ceiling.
I heard that.
Yeah. Which is, there are a lot of people who are in this boat, who are like, I don't have a lot of time. I'm thinking of doctors, right? I don't have a lot of time to work out. I don't have a lot of time to meal prep. I don't have a lot of time to do this. I'm doing what I can. I'm a carnivore. I'm only eating when I'm hungry, and I'm still a heavy person. For those people where you really think they actually have dialed in the proper human diet, they're optimizing as much as they can. What would you say to those people?
So we would definitely talk about their hormones. Have you checked all your hormones, and are they all in optimal range? Have we checked your thyroid gland function thoroughly? Have we checked the complete thyroid panel? Have we checked your adrenal glands out thoroughly? Have we ruled out any adrenal tumors or any other tumors that can sometimes basically just stop fat loss in its tracks? Because a lot of them can, there's a tumor called an insulinoma that's, even if you eat zero carb, you're still going to be secreting so much insulin it'll be almost impossible for you to lose weight. And there are multiple other adrenal conditions that can cause that. Are they very, very, very rare? Yeah, they're very, very, very rare. And that's why you don't often see that sort of thing happen. Another thing that I don't talk about a lot, because I really try to keep my message about hope, is that, if when you were in your mother's womb, if your mother ate a terrible diet, wow, makes me want to duck when it goes over. If your mother if your mother lived on ding dongs and Cheetos and Pepsi while she was pregnant with you, whether she had diagnosed gestational diabetes or not, because back in the day, a lot of doctors, all they would check was a fasting glucose. They would not do a 1 hour or 3 hour glucose tolerance test. They definitely wouldn't have checked an A1C. And so, when you were in the womb, you could have had some epigenetic switches flipped that just basically made you insulin resistant lifelong. And we actually know that because when we follow children of gestational diabetes pregnancies, they have a higher risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And so is that a guarantee they'll be obese? No. But are they at more risk of becoming obese and remaining obese? Yes, they are. I think the same holds true for children after they've been born. If they're weaned off on rice cereal, and every single thing that is put into their mouth for the first 7 years of their life is a carbohydrate. They never have touched liver. They've never really eaten any kind of fatty meat. They just eat, rice and fruits and bread and goldfish crackers and then the Doritos and the Pepsi, and that's all they've eaten. Those children can have epigenetic switches flipped that will make them insulin resistant for the remainder of their life. And that's going to make it much, much harder to lose all the fat that you want to lose. And so that's why I said most of these people, when they go keto or carnivore, they do lose fat. And just like in your journey, you lost a chunk, right? When you, as you come along, but you're not where you want to be yet. And that's actually quite common. And then when we talk about what your mom ate when you were, in her belly, right, you're like, yeah, it was pretty carb intensive diet. And then for the first few years of my life, it was pretty carb intensive. And so you may well be one of those people who have had epigenetic switches flipped in a direction you would not like for them to be flipped. And now you're kind of stuck with being whatever euphemism you want to, fluffy, whatever euphemism you want to put on it. But if somebody looks at a picture of you from 5 years ago and compares that to a picture of now, you look like your more slender younger sister than you looked even 5 years ago. And so obviously you are improving yourself continuously. I mean, you look younger now than when I first met you.
Yeah.
And that's but I think that's the kind of evidence you look for when you're trying to find someone to follow their nutrition advice. And so, when I first started medical practice, I was relatively slender. 3-4 years later, I was, so fat that I literally rolled out of bed in the morning. So if you had seen that journey, in that community, you'd be like, yeah, he don't know much about nutrition, right? Because I have literally seen him swell up over the last 3 or 4 years. He obviously is not going to be able to help me lose fat.
Right. And I think ultimately we need a partnership with our doctor if they're giving us lifestyle advice. And while a doctor could say, hey, I don't do this, but I see this working for people, is perhaps not as good an advertisement as I'm doing this and it's starting to work for me. But I think that, at the end of the day, one of the things, and it's hard because I get this on an emotional perspective. One of the things that we have to do to get honest about our health as humans is to get a little less defensive.
Yep.
For everyone,
Absolutely.
For the doctor who thinks they know it all, and for the patient who's really sensitive about what you think about them. It's all very emotionally charged. And at the end of the day, we're opening a dialogue around all of these topics. And, what you said resonated with me, that sometimes when you get angry about something that's said, it's really important to look at why you're angry. Like, if someone insults you directly to your face, you don't have to go too deeply into it. But if it wasn't directly at you, why did their word choice impact me so hard? Do I think that my worth as a human is wrapped up in how much body fat I have? Is that why I was so triggered? Like, while I do think there is a limit of what our body fat should be to be optimally healthy, I don't think what our body fat is defines what we are worth as a human. And I think that's
totally
what a lot of people, feel.
Yeah. And that's, I think for a lot of healthcare providers and a lot of fitness advice givers, there is judgment when they say things like that. But I think people would just have to, come to know me and know that I don't morally or ethically judge people. That's not my job. I'm not your priest, right? I'm your doctor if you're my patient, or I'm Dr. Barry if you watch my YouTube channel. I'm trying to help you. I'm not judging you because your BMI is this or that. The BMI scale is not a morality scale. That's not what it is, right? The waist to height ratio is not it's not an ethical judgment. It is an objective measure of health.
Right. And I think that if we can all be a little bit more objective about some of these things, we can work together. Because if you're stalled, if you're losing weight, if you're not losing weight, if what you're doing is not working for you, every single person is a constant science experiment. And like the central feature of science is objectivity.
Yes. Yeah. You can't get emotional and do good science. And I think a great example of that is when the American College of Physicians came out recently with their 4 studies that they published that said basically all the research saying that meat is bad for you, meat causes cancer, processed meat is bad for you, all of that research is crap. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't show anything. It doesn't even really show correlation. So until further notice, it's what the ACP said, until further notice, keep eating your meat, keep eating processed meat, because we don't know if it's bad for you or not. But the advice we had given in the past about that being bad was based on stupid research. So ignore all that and just keep eating your meat, and we'll let you know if we actually come up with some
figure something out.
Immediately, people on the plant-based side, the vegan side, immediately became hysterically emotional. Right? Now, does that mean that they are invested in this and they mean the best for everybody? No. I would posit that means that there's a problem there. Because if you came at me with objective evidence that keto was unhealthy, if you came at me with control studies and like, dude, this shows, there's a huge study, it was blinded, it was controlled, it was randomized, keto's dangerous, I would stop talking about keto. If you came at me with extraordinary evidence like that, I'd be like, okay, I'm sorry. I once again was wrong. I once again have learned. And we're going to now go back to the drawing board and look for the proper human diet again. But that's not what the plant-based, vegan, vegetarian community did. They became emotional and defensive and wanted to file lawsuits and wanted to do all this. And I don't think they were doing that to protect the average Twitter user or the average YouTube video watcher. I think they did that.
They were protecting their identity.
To protect their own identity, to protect their own ego, and to perhaps protect their own nest egg. I don't know. But you don't, a doctor doesn't become emotional when their judgment is questioned, if they're a good, smart thinking doctor, they always, and then you might get surface emotional, but you're going to think about that later and go, maybe they're right. Maybe I should Google that. Maybe I should read the latest research on that. Maybe I've missed something. That's the sign of a good scientist and of a good doctor, is never being 100% sure of anything. And then definitely never making a ethical or moral judgment against a patient or just a person on the street based on what you think you know.
Right, absolutely. I think that a really good scientist, now it's hard because scientists are people and people like to be right, but a really good scientist put aside their desire to be right, for the thing they thought to be right, for their hypothesis to be right, and knows that ultimately their job is to try to prove themselves wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, I mean, scientists of old knew about human nature much more than I feel like we do these days. We feel like, oh, I'm different. I can be objective. And even though I'm going to get paid $1 million to recommend this product, I can still be objective and not be swayed by that. No, you can't. That's human nature. And that's why we developed the scientific method. That's why we came up with that as humans, was to protect the scientific inquiry from human nature. You cannot be invested in your results emotionally, or you will make a mistake. You have to blind yourself from the results. You have to blind yourself from the actual performance of the study, or your preconceived notions will, not may, but will leak into the results. That is human nature. That's why we came up with the scientific method, to protect our body of scientific knowledge from our emotional human selves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, at the end of the day, I think it really matters that we talked about this, because I feel like spending an hour on this topic perhaps explained your position a little better. And I also think it's an important point to get the difference between opening a conversation and closing it, because I think many people saw your statement as a conversation closer.
Yeah. And you know me well enough to know, Kimmy, that seldom everything I say basically is a conversation starter.
Right.
I want us to think. I want us to look outside the box. I want us to keep reading and learning every day. Never am I trying to shut down debate or shut down the conversation, because when you do that, you stop learning. And I am at the very core of my being a student. I may be an MD now, but that doesn't mean that I've learned everything there is to know about medicine or nutrition or anything. I am just a student with initials now. That's what an MD should be. And so I hope that I did trigger some healthcare providers out there to take a fresh look at the guidelines and to take a fresh look at what they thought they knew. But again, that would be a conversation starter, wouldn't it? Not a closer.
Right. And I think that it sort of boils to, I'm not a Dr. Phil fan, but one of his statements is actually really useful. How's that working for you? Like,
exactly.
Hey, doctor, how's your advice working for you?
Exactly. And I think that, yes, 100%. And I think that is an excellent question to ask of every expert who gives you advice on anything. So if you go see a financial advisor, I think you should be able to look at their last 1040. I think that should be part of it. It's full disclosure. Well, let's see how that's working for you. Let's see how you did last year. If you go to a doctor, you should either see a doctor who is very healthy, and that doesn't mean that they're skinny, right? It just means that they are healthy for their genetics, for their previous life, for their time in the womb, for their time in childhood. You should see a healthy doctor. And if you don't see a healthy doctor in front of you, I think you have every right as a patient to ask a respectful question as to why you don't appear to be that healthy doctor. How am I supposed to trust my one life to you if you don't look that healthy yourself? I think that's a valid question, and I don't think that doctors or people on Twitter should get triggered when somebody asks that sort of question or makes that kind of statement. Like, well, doc, you're pretty fat. How do you propose to give me nutrition advice?
Right, absolutely. And I think ultimately there is this question that is a different question, but that could be used to be opened up, which is we as a society have a certain ideal body type we think is the only healthy body type. But if we look at the historical record, that may not be true. And
exactly.
The only reason that this actually feels important to me, because otherwise it's just other people's opinions and screw them if they don't, work for you. But on a one-on-one basis is really what matters is your own opinion about yourself. And if you out there in the world listening to this recording are super hard on yourself because you feel like you're doing everything you can to optimize your body type, but you still don't look like a supermodel, that there is a larger discussion to be had about appropriate healthy body types.
Absolutely. And there is a range of body types. Some people are ectomorphs and they are by their genetic nature super slender. Some people are mesomorphs and they just tend to hold more muscle. I mean, these different body types were talked about hundreds of years ago in medicine. Some people are endomorphs and they just tend to be fluffier or right or big boned or healthy if you're in the South. That's just how they are, and that does not mean that they are by definition metabolically healthy or unhealthy. That's just their body type. And so there are people running around out in the world who are strict carnivores, and they are still not going to look like Kate Moss. That's the only super skinny supermodel I can think of her name. But you're not built that way. You're never going to have that body type because you don't have that body type. That doesn't mean you're unhealthy. That doesn't mean you're bad ethically or morally. It doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean you're a failure. I think a lot of this is just self-awareness that, hey, this is me. And I love me and I'm happy with me. I'm always going to be trying to improve me, but that doesn't mean I hate me. It just means I want to make me better and better.
Right. We're all enduring unless we're dead.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly right. Only when they put you 6 feet under are you done. But up until that instant, you're still an athlete. You're still a growing, developing human who can get better, who can get healthier, who can get smarter.
Right. And we're a culture that really prizes before and after. We like the transformation. Yeah. We like the Cinderella story. And the reality is, like, every day we can optimize more and more to be a healthier human.
Yeah. And I think that we can all hope for that Cinderella story, and we can all have that before and after picture, but the end product is not going to look the same for all of us. So some of us have a false Cinderella story narrative in our head, right? That we can, accomplish something and we just can't. That is not possible for our body type, and there are a lot of people who dream of being a billionaire. But if you come from very poor beginnings, that's highly unlikely to happen, regardless of how hard you work and how whatever all the judgments you would heap on yourself. You can definitely do better in life than you started out, but you may not ever get to be a billionaire.
Right. And ultimately, I think what we're both arguing for is not to just accept your lot in life. We're saying optimize, but also don't shame or beat yourself up because your journey doesn't look like somebody else's journey.
Always strive to improve yourself, but also love yourself, and also be very aware that what is a complete and utter success for you doesn't look like a complete and utter success for other people.
Right. I was at a convention recently, and there was a woman who had always been fit, always been a bodybuilder, not always, probably not as a child, but she'd been a bodybuilder for years. She'd been into the gym since she was in high school. She was keto. She was optimizing. She'd won some competition recently. Everything was great. And there was a moment when I sort of was comparing myself and feeling like my flabs, as opposed to my abs, were not as impressive as, in these moments. And then one of my clients came up to me and had tears in her eyes about the fact that she was able to get there in an airplane seat without a seatbelt extender.
Or without buying 2 seats. Yes. And I mean, what a victory. What a wonderful, beautiful victory that is. And I can't tell you how many people have sent pictures of themselves on an airplane with the seatbelt buckled, and there's room between, and it's one seatbelt with no extension.
Yeah.
And there's room between the seatbelt and their belly. And they're like, boom, Dr. B, look, I didn't have to, I not only do I not need an extender anymore, but I've got room to spare in this regular seatbelt. And for them, that's their Cinderella story. And I think that's 100% an authentic, real Cinderella story that they should take great pride in.
Right. And I think really, like, to wrap it all up, anyone who's worked with you, who's known you for a while, has followed your journey and your work with other people, knows that you're equally, if not more, excited about the woman in an airplane seat than you are about somebody winning a trophy in a bodybuilding contest.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for having this chat with me to clear up perhaps some misconceptions about your recent dumbass tweet.
It's always a pleasure, Kim Howerton. Hopefully you won't hold this against me and you'll have me on again sometime.
Yeah, I think we'll do something again. All right, bye. Thank you so much for joining us on Keto Life Support. If you'd like more, you can join our friendly Facebook group, Keto Life Support. Can't find it? Go to ketolifesupport.com. If you ever want to suggest a topic for discussion, that would be the place to do it. We'd really, really appreciate it if you would go to your podcast app and subscribe, because that's awesome. And what would be super awesome is if you'd be so kind as to write a review for us. Though we would love it if that review was awesome, just writing a review is all we ask. So have a fabulous keto week, and we'll see you next time.